it's something because when you actually, I'm sure you know this as an artist and producer, when you listen to a track or you work on it for so long, and sometimes you listen to it so much you start to hate your own song. Like, oh
Right.
man, I like basically every song that I've released, I'm like, man, I just don't like it. Like, it doesn't feel like I'm not vibing to it. And then sometimes you just gotta take a break, step out of, the room and just do something other than focus on that, and then
Mm.
come back to it in a bit, and then you realize like, okay, this sounds all right. Three, two, one. Hey guys, welcome back to the Wait Podcast. I know it's been a while. Stuff gets busy, but yeah, it's your boy Sajimura. We back. You know what I'm saying? And today I have a very special guest. His artist name is Dingani. Um, I know him as Josh, but yeah, he is an artist, a vocalist, producer. A lot of different things, and I'll just let Josh introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Evan. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your platform.
No problem.
It's amazing to kind of see it develop and kind of spearhead this independently. So I'm very grateful to be able to kind of like make an appearance. But yeah, about me, as I was introduced, Dingani is my artist name, but I go by Josh because that's my legal government name. So, a little bit about me. Um, I studied psychology at U of T, specialized in neuroscience with a minor in biology. And I'm originally well, I was born in Zambia, but raised predominantly in South Africa. So I lived out by from like primary school until high school. I was there for like 20 years. And so that's been home for a lot of my life. And decided to come here and study in Canada, which has been really great. In terms of music, which is a deep passion of mine, background with it, I was originally in my school choir in high school and loved singing. I've always loved singing. And so that was just something that I always kind of took to as a natural, like, sort of way of channeling music. And I love English as well in terms of like writing and poetry, and that's another thing. So I guess as I got older, the two sort of started to blur lines, singing, writing, lyricism, and an interest in wanting to create my own sort of songs, just because um, I had like thought of all these sounds in my head, but I was like, how do I actually create those things and create these songs? And so took to producing as well. My brother's a musician, so I was just inspired by him because he was the sort of person who was like, "Oh, like make beats, like in my bedroom," and they were terrible in the beginning, but the way like where he's at now, I kid you not, like as a musician, is always something that inspires me, and so I took on after him in terms of just picking up my digital audio station. So like I use FL Studio and just hammering it away, hoping that
Yeah,
like I would be able to figure it out and make something that didn't sound terrible. But I've made my fair share of terrible music.
same here. All right. So yeah, that's I guess a little short introduction on our guest today. Um, yeah, I mean, like when I first started, I basically, I mean, I've talked about this before, but I mean, I started on what was it? I think it was Band Lab. No, Garage Band was technically the first one when I was like 12. Wasn't really making any music, but just making random things. But my first kind of thing I made was on BandLab, and then I took a little. I was just messing around, did a bunch of different things, and then eventually I actually got started learning a real kind of DAW, digital audio workspace, and yeah, that's when it's like I feel like to people who don't know about that world, it's like its own sort of tool itself, right? It's its own art form, right?
Mm,
Even production, because there's different stages of production, right?
sure.
Even just people think about mixing, mastering, like just the things most people don't really think about as much. I mean, there's a reason why this whole field's dedicated to just one aspect of a song, right?
Sure.
Like the mix is so important. How you, how it's mastered, just I mean, production, I mean, just vocals, everything, right? There's so
Yeah,
many different parts to it, and I wanted to learn this new skill, and you know, the more you know, the more freedom you have,
for
is what I
sure.
find, right? Um, and they're saying like knowledge is power, and it really is, especially when it comes to being creative. And yeah, I found it. It's been a fun process of just learning on my own. Like I didn't go to school for production or anything, or uh, and I'm just using my laptop that has an i5 processor and 16 gigs of RAM, and I have to plug it in and do all these kind of things for it to work. But I find it's just a lot of fun. Like another outlet for me, and I'm glad that people actually enjoy listening to what I make. I mean, it's something because when you actually I'm sure you know this as an artist and producer, when you listen to a track or you work on it for so long, and sometimes you listen to it so much you start to hate your own song. Like, oh
Right.
man, I like basically every song that I've released, I'm like, man, I just don't like it. Like, it doesn't feel like I'm not vibing to it. And then sometimes you just gotta take a break, step out of the room, and just do something other than focus on that, and then
Mm,
come back to it in a bit, and then you realize like, okay, this sounds all right. Like
yeah.
I'm being a little ridiculous right now, but
Yeah. That like feeling, something that you just like described there, of like the turmoil, the artistic turmoil, being like, I made this song, it sounds great. Like you get the euphoria, like in the
mm,
initial stages of production, where you're like, I'm putting together all these things, I'm composition building, I'm mixing, and this is sounding amazing. I've never done it before. All these ideas are flowing, and you're like, this is endless. And then you start to really hammering it out and getting to the final stages of being like, okay, you're moving to that like process of like, I'm now considering finalizing this, maybe moving on to the mastering stage. And
yeah.
then just like the anxiety seeps in where it's like, I don't like this. This sounds terrible. Why did I have these
I
things?
need to add something else.
Exactly. Or like completely, or the, I don't know if you've gotten to the stage where you're like, I'm just gonna completely take everything away and then strip the entire song
Yeah.
away and then like build it back up again, only to find that you've done something very similar to what you did the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally relate to that. Like there's so many songs that started out as one thing and then they slowly got more complicated. Like there's this one sort of progression that I've used in a lot of my songs, and it all started from this one thing I remember releasing on YouTube, like just me playing it, like some improv I did on piano. And I remember performing it in like middle school. It was so long ago, and from that point, it was like slowly, just on that progression, that one song, I've gotten so many different tracks and things
Mhm.
out of it. Like it was
Mhm.
called Good Times, and it was literally just four chords going up and down, starting from F major, E minor, D minor, C major, and then starting again, going up. Just those four chords. I mean, and from that, like I've made half of my songs with that sort of basis, right? Like, well, half the songs that I've released at least. Um, and one thing I found, it's kind of hard when you find something you like to get out of that kind of I wouldn't say rut. You kind of get comfortable with using
Mhm.
that sort of progression and movement and those movements within um, that key. And it's nice to just break apart from that because I got stuck for a while. I was like, man, this just sounds like I feel like I'm just writing the same stuff.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't sound different. It's not different enough. I mean, I'm sure to the person who doesn't listen, who only listens to it every once in a while, I'm sure it sounds fine. But to me,
Yeah.
it's like, man, I need to change something about this to make it sound different, you
Yeah.
know? And I found like, I can't remember where, I think it was on some YouTube video I watched. They did this exercise where you just pick four random notes,
Mhm.
um, and you design your harmony off those four random notes you play. Like, just, it doesn't have to be in any key. And then you just harmonize over that basic melody. And it could be something that sounds bad, like literally, and you just use it as a basis to like break out of your usual habits. And I found that actually helped a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, listening to more music expands your repertoire and what you base your art off of. But
Mhm.
yeah, just that simple exercise of just pick four random notes
Yeah.
and just try to figure something out, like, and it was just yeah. And then from that point is when I was like, oh, okay. Like now, I find that I'm broken out of that just being in that C major and just doing
Yeah.
that same chord progression or
Yeah.
just mixing them around. I still like that progression because it's so nice, those three chords. But I mean, it's just yeah. Do you ever have that kind of feeling where you just feel like this song just sounds something like something I've done before, and you just feel like I feel like I'm getting comfortable doing something like this, or it just sounds the same to you. You know what I mean?
I definitely have those moments, and I don't know. Yeah, I feel like how do I tackle this? There are definitely moments where it's like I've made something and I'm like, oh, again, like that's the whole repetition of things. There are moments where it's like I think going back to what you mentioned, like sort of resynthesizing it. There's like you could probably draw parallels between that and sampling and resampling things. So they're
Mm-hmm.
pretty interesting ways where you can like reorganize, resynthesize, change the composition of something that you've already done before, or include or make little cute cameos to other songs you've made.
Yeah.
But in terms of getting stuck in it, a lot of the times when I find, I think you mentioned this already though, but a lot of times when I find that I'm kind of getting stuck on making the same idea or just like repetition within my songs, particularly when I'm in like the mode of like making a project, um, I find that similar to you, listening to other music really does help. Like, there's a lot of ideas, albeit there's also a bit of danger. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think just the human mind and the way it is, sometimes you can create you can think an idea is new, but in essence, it's something that's just borrowed. I think everything is truly borrowed at this point, but
Yeah.
sometimes you can like trick your own mind into thinking, I'm brilliant. Did I came up with this magical thing? But
Oh,
no,
I'm so good. You know.
you're like, I'm so good at being a thief, copying. So stuff like that can definitely happen where it's like you don't even realize it, but you're subconsciously taking in, or other people's is influencing your own. So it's almost having to
Mm-hmm.
do the fine act of like when you're in that rut or like continuous repetition of like your creative medium of choice, listening to other things or exploring other mediums and other people's creations. Maybe not just music, but like other forms of media as well. If it's like film, or like visual
Mm, I
art, for
see.
instance, that stuff can really help. But also just recognizing what is an influence versus what is complete like plagiarism, academic offenses,
Oh God,
as the
academic
UFC,
offense.
as the UFC likes to make known. But I think as well, one thing for me, whenever that happens, is also I've found that, and I've spoken to so many artists about this as well, but sometimes just taking a break, like completely, it's hard to do because I love listening to
Mm-hmm.
music, and I think art in all forms is something that we're exposed to like every single day. It's hard not to kind of see it and be moved in some way. But at least from the production aspect, you like engaging in it, I try to sometimes cut myself off where I'm just like, let me just exist as a human being and not as a creative and just go
Yeah.
through life. And I find that that's almost like it's like recharging a battery. So the next time I go back in, I'm thinking of different things, and hopefully it's not the same sort of repeated idea. But it can certainly be a challenge. I think speaking to other artists also is a really great way to kind of get out of that because people, human connections and having conversations and, allowing that frustration to be known to other like-minded individuals in and of itself can be a source of relief. And maybe that can like take away this mental block of your brain just being like, I want to do the same thing again and again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get like, especially talking as with artists like yourself, and I've talked with Zion before,
Yeah.
like just talking to other people just in general. Um, because it doesn't even have to be that you're inspired by a specific thing that, for example, I'm inspired by one thing that you do, and then I'm like, oh, I want to implement a similar idea or whatever function. It's like sometimes it can just spring, new
Mm,
connections are made in your brain, and it doesn't even sound anything like what the person you're talking about makes, but it's just something that something that triggers something in your mind. Just different
mm,
experiences expand your mind in general.
mm,
So, you know, different perspectives, different music, different art in general helps. And I find that interesting how you when you mentioned before about the whole plagiarism thing. That's one thing I've always thought about too. Like,
mm,
it's such a fine line in the legal sense of like what is plagiarism and what is not. And for music, I find it's nearly impossible to define what it is.
sure.
Honestly, I wouldn't even attempt to try and do anything like that because unless it's at least in my opinion, unless it's a direct copy of something,
Mm,
I don't know. It's very difficult because one of the coolest things in music is putting your own spin on something else, right?
sure.
Like one of the songs I'm working on right now, I take like this this phrase from like a D'Angelo song, right? And
Mm,
I play it in my own way, but I give like I wanted to name the track a
mm,
variation of the name of that
mm,
of
mm,
the original track, just to like pay homage and like
yeah.
why does it sound familiar, And it's like the entire track is obviously not that; it's just a portion of it, and it's like
Mm,
oh this is kind of cool, right? Like you
mm,
pay respect in that sense, but like I'm not just sampling and just literally placing it in there and saying I was completely original or anything like you know I feel like with that kind of stuff I mean because I don't know the thing is for me music is meant to be shared,
for
right?
sure.
um, and the sharing of music is kind of my favorite part. I think everyone's favorite part about music is sharing it with others, and as long as I feel like it's the same thing. Like we talked about, we talked about the academic integrity thing. It's like as long as you give your credit and you don't claim what is not yours, I think it's perfectly fine to be inspired by others because, like you said, most likely none of us are having any original ideas at this point, right? Millions
Exactly.
of years of human being alive. But yeah. Speaking of other music, what if there are any artists that are you currently listening to that you are enjoying just in your free time?
What other? I literally have to call my phone to be like, my bad. My music taste is, as I think a lot of people who know me quite well, is like it just ping pongs around different things. So it's very erratic in terms of what I like to listen to. But I was somebody recommended, I will butcher this name, but Flavian Berger, spelled Flavien, and then the surname is Berger. And they're like French. Apparently, Apple Music classifies it as French pop. I don't really think it is that. It's more like French
Okay.
alternative. Um, but just purely from a production standpoint, well, actually, I don't know if the person who watched this, but the person who suggested this to me, they're like a wonderful visual artist named Belinda Shu, amazing.
Shout out.
And yeah, literally shout out to Belinda, honestly. So, I guess I'm listening to this project called Contretemps. Again, I don't speak French. To all the francophones, I really do apologize for the
It's okay.
disrespect I'm putting out here, but it's a really beautiful project. Like, I think I'm just listening to it from a purely sonic and production based sort of standpoint. Like just appreciating, it's for me, I think I've always been quite curious about like the boundaries of electronic music and how it bleeds into so many different streams of like genres. And so it's like within this project, it's such an interesting sort of combination of like you can hear that there are some contemporary influences like jazz in some way, and then it's this like very strange and then peculiar combination of like electronic sounds and industrial components and like a lot of synthesizers kind of now coming in and it's beautiful to listen to, like all the songs and just how they're created. And I think one of the most interesting things in composition building is just a beautiful thing. I feel like something
Mm-hmm.
you can appreciate that as somebody who does like jazz, the jazz sort of pianist style. So from that perspective, I've really been appreciating that bit of music. I think another project was by Ori, spelled Ouri, frame of fauna. A really interesting project as well. It's alternative again, alternative leaning into electronic. Um, and it's very ambience. Like the entire project is sort of it's like drenched in like reverb and again synthesizers kind of just like droning and pads and vocals that are really these like sort of haunting sort of sustains throughout and then you get these really peculiar industrial sort of beats where it's like there's like kicks that just like they sound muffled because they've altered the sort of like frequencies to like remove the high end and it's just sort of like mids and lows. And yeah, it's just again, this was Ori's, I guess like they are a like Canadian, I think Montreal based artist and yeah, really just been appreciating a lot more alternative sounds and electronic spaces just because from a production perspective, it's always just so inspiring to see how people can, you know, twist and resynthesize and just make what we've known as in terms of music theory sound so wild and crazy, but still adhere to what sounds like musically pleasing to the ear. So really been appreciating those 2 hours. What about you? I'm pretty curious if you have any recommendations.
Yeah, well, recently I've been, I don't know if you know Snarky Puppy. They're a jazz, they're a jazz funk fusion. They're
Yeah.
fusion, yeah, more like fusion, really a fusion band. And they've they've been releasing singles for their. I think they're having a. I don't know when the album is coming out, but there's an upcoming album, and there's this one song called "Bet" by Snarky Puppy. Oh my god! Like I listened to that song like 30 times this in the last few weeks. It's just so technically brilliant. And
Mm,
it's all like because it's all live, right? It's like a 15-person band and it's
mm,
just pure like the whole essence of fusion is just jam based music nerdery kind of going on right now. It's basically jazz heads going nuts, like
mhm,
just going and then they're pushing the boundaries of jazz in that sense too.
mm,
But it's also
mm,
funky. Like it's so
mhm.
funky, but they got like weird time signatures like in 15/4 or whatever. Like it's like if you don't know what it is, it'd be difficult for you to clap to it, but you still kind of know how to clap to it if you don't know anything about music. Like for me, that's what my goal with music is eventually is to get to that point where it's technically complicated, but even the novice or there's a casual can appreciate it at that level, but also somebody who is very into it and knows a lot can also appreciate it. Like I think a
For
perfect
sure.
example of that is Jacob Collier, right? I mean, he is
Yes.
so technically brilliant in production, and his vocals and his vocal production and his instrumentation, and he plays like 50 instruments, and he has like, oh my god, I just see his Logic sessions are just covered with
Just like
he
of
can
layers.
draw
Yeah.
yeah complete like a whole picture with that like and but he's also people are able to appreciate his music at just a casual level too, not just people
Sure.
who are musicians and or into music.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Snarky Puppy, Bet, Trinity, and Belmont, those are the three most recent ones. They're super good, like just fire. Like so many like the solos, the
Mm,
sax solos, and they had a clavinet solo. There's this one guy just plays the clavinet, and he's so good.
yeah.
Corey Henry's in there as well. He plays with them, and like he's one of the best organists. Like he's the best organist of our generation for sure. Like so, yeah, them Snarky Puppy for sure. I've been listening to them. Also, a little bit different. Snow Allegra. I've been listening to her a lot.
Ooh,
Just you know, I mean, her first of all, her the production on her. I literally just listened to it just because the production and her vocals are just her vibrato is so tight. Like I don't know how
mm,
she. I'm not even a singer, and I'm just like it's so nice.
amazing.
And just listening to Temporary Highs in the Violet Skies. That's I mean her most recent one. And then
Beautiful.
what was it Those Feels Again? There's also that.
Yeah, such those two are such strong albums. And I I wanted to just quickly go back to like what you had mentioned about Snarky, Puppy. I will listen to Bets. That's you hooked me. Literally, I'm curious now to see what it's like. But I think it's such a I'm always in such awe of musical instrumentalists and how they like when musicians come together, instrumentalists come together, jazz artists come together, and it's like you're playing. There's such a there's much to be said about the psychology that's there. Like this, we talk about a theory of like the collective consciousness, right? And
Hmm.
I'm almost like when musicians are in this state of flow and this state of sync, like they're thinking in a way and you know, feeling for cues that like it's almost as though they're one machine. That's like consisting of 15 people. Like that's insane to be able to keep such consistencies. And yet it's possible. And yet there's room for variation and improvisation and just all sorts of magic that can kind of take place. But like it's always that key of like knowing your movement in the system, knowing when it's that time to kind of step into the front and allow your instrument to kind of take the fold and take the center stage of it, and for everyone else to kind of sit at the back and almost like support, right? That's something to
Yeah.
be said, really, I think, with any sort of musical group. It reminds me a lot of like choirs. Being in a choir, that was one thing that I was always influenced by, was like knowing how to be a part of many, not just trying to be the single individual trying to shine. It's like
Yeah.
so I was just when you were explaining and just like the passion that oozed when you were talking about Sparky Puppy, I was like, that they sound amazing. I'm definitely gonna listen and just all my flowers and respect to like musicians and instrumentalists and bands. Like it's amazing. But I apologize if I cut you off. You had mentioned Snow Allegra and I don't know if you were gonna mention any other
Oh
artists.
yeah. I mean, those two have been who have been listening to recently the most. I would say. Also, just some classics, Maxwell and D'Angelo. They're always in my rotation, but um, I've definitely been listening to James. I mean, Jameson has been one of my most listened to people like in the last few months in general. Like his production on the tracks is just so crisp. One thing I want to one thing that's so great about his production is it's so minimal yet it still fills the space. Like that's
Mhm.
and the thing is he also like yourself is a vocalist. He sings and he also produces all his tracks. He
Mhm.
just works with a writer, him and a composer. They work
Mhm.
together. He produces the tracks and he writes with um, his other teammate, and it's like it's just so good, just so clean.
Mhm.
And every album has its own kind of vibe. I was looking at his because I've only really listened to his most recent two, which were "Heals Me" and "Velvet."
Mhm.
Um, and like his previous albums apparently were not even like he's very R&B kind of soul
Mhm.
focused, but they were previously like more folk. He was doing like folk and then he did
Oh,
electronic. Like every album has been so different. Even
mm,
Velvet to Heals Me, like Velvet is literally like it could be made in the late 80s or not in the late
yeah,
80s, late 70s. Like it
yeah.
sounds the sound he uses so many of those, the like 808 drum kit and just old synthesizers and just
Mm,
that whole vibe of it. And I mean, it's called Velvet. Like the album cover is literally like it could be from the 70s anyway. And then Heals Me it just sounds like something Timberland would have done, like just got that
mm,
just 2000s, mid 2000s kind of style production, like bass
mm,
heavy, interesting percussion. And yeah, definitely I've been listening. I listen to him a lot. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm taking that recommendation. I'm literally noting these down in my head because I'm
yeah. You
like,
gotta
I know.
send me after. I can't actually click anywhere because it'll stop the recording. But you gotta send me those you're listening to after. You know, that's one thing I've been trying to get into is more ambient music.
Mhm.
Um, I've tried a bit, but I haven't really sat down and just listened to a 30-minute ambient track and just been sucked into the world of that. You know.
Yeah. Like when you're listening to music, like what is the what is the most optimal like listening experience for you? Like what's the ideal? Like what is like when you're just like I'm in the zone to kind of delve into an album? Is it sort of like a is it a speaker listen? Is it like a headphones listen? Is it like like a I know people love driving and listening to music too,
Oh
but
yeah. For me, I think this is a very, I don't know, maybe more specific to musicians, where you just sit. I just sit and I listen, like in the dark, like before I go to sleep. That's when I really just sit and listen. And it's not even, it's half of me actually really enjoying it, and the other half is just me studying. It's literally me studying the music. Because it's like, this is just so much I can learn from this, And I find obviously for me it's a headphones listening experience I think was the most ideal for absorbing, but to vibe I think it's definitely on a speaker, like out loud, like doing dishes or cooking with friends. Like that's honestly the best time to vibe to music. I find in the car is fun too, but yeah.
I'd say when I think about that like experience, headphones as well. I think I just have so much respect for headphones because you can really, like you said, take in everything. And I think especially again going back to like production, there are a lot of intentional things that producers end up doing, right? Panning and when they're in the mastering process, like how they spread the width of the actual sort of song, like making it more spacious. And I guess also with the beauty of all these different I guess mastering sort of devices with like Dolby Atmos, where you have now like this like crazy sort of surround sound. You
Yeah.
really get to kind of like dive into the song not only as like this listening experience, but like now an atmospheric listening experience where it's like you feel it all around you. But I definitely get and the appreciation of like listening to music with friends who can learn to appreciate. I'm the type of person that is like, I'll keep my playlist to myself, and if you don't like it, like we've got beef. If you don't like my
Yeah,
song,
yeah, yeah. If you don't vibe to this, like I don't know, man. Can we still be friends? Like
no, like but I'd say for me, like my preferred listening experience, headphones, but I also really do like I guess just even just like any sort of Bluetooth earbuds when walking through like the
mm-hmm.
world. It's just like as soon as I got like
Yeah.
as soon as I was in the AirPods gang, you know, like sorry, what did you say to me? But as soon as I entered that status of life, it was also such a beautiful thing to be able to kind of pass through life almost with a soundtrack. And so it's
Yeah.
like, you know, being able to curate it for yourself, like you're walking and it's like, and that's what I love sometimes about like ambient music too, is that it's like it feels like you're in a movie, so you get to
Oh my
curate
God, yeah.
your own like movie scene and feel like you're connected in the world in a completely different way. And I think again that just shows the applications of music when it even comes to like world building, right? It's like no wonder there's
Yeah.
such intricacies that go into films when they selecting like song titles or song choices for a scene and to go with a character. And it's like there's so much application to music outside of just sort of like an isolated listening experience, but also so much beauty in an isolated listening experience because both offer such different levels of connection to what you're hearing.
Yeah, I totally as soon as you said walking with your earbuds in and it's like soundtrack of your life. Literally there's just one song on Heals Me Jameson Rolling Stone. Every time I hear that song, it's just like I just think of this one moment. I had a really late exam. I finished at like 11 p.m. It was horrible timing. And then I'm on the subway back home trying to catch the last train back And it's just I just always had that song playing because I was down one of my few songs that are downloaded. And I was like, this is like every time I listen to that song, I just think of that moment and that time in my life, which it wasn't that long ago. Like it was like last year.
Yeah.
But it also reminds me of that course, the horrible course I had to take. But it's fine. It's done now. But
That's
yeah, totally. Like I
the
totally
point that
get that.
the point that you mentioned, like of the music and that's you just reminded me. I was thinking a lot about like music and memory, because there's such interesting things how a song can be for you tied to like give you such a visceral reaction of like, oh God, I was taking that course and I lost the exam.
Yeah.
But it's like I don't know, so much power with how the associations you can draw with the song. I know like a good friend of mine who's always like, this song, they're like, I can listen to this song and I can literally trace it back to this period of my life. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's so powerful, like how music is now interwoven into your memory, right? It's sort of like if you want to experience this, and in many ways, I think that that offers there's like a lot of beauty behind it because it's like if you consider some form of therapy, like music can tie you to memories that you maybe or experiences that you might not be able to have anymore, tie you to people that you once knew. So I don't know. It's just such a powerful thing that like again, world building and just memory building now.
Hmm.
And so,
Yeah, it must be interesting for you as a psychology major, and now you're working. Um, it must be because you obviously have a different perspective, and I know there's a big field of music therapy and all this kind of stuff, and I mean, treating people with Alzheimer's and just the power of music, and it's just so nice, it's just so it makes me feel so warm inside to see this how music affects people in such interesting ways. Like music can move people to act, to change, like it can be from a simple song that makes you feel good in the morning when you wake up and it plays as your alarm, you know, or it could be something that moves your people to change, right? I mean, think about all the I mean, there's so many different tracks, but like think about the protest tracks of the late 60s and the civil rights movement. Like, I mean, I've taken a few music courses, and we always talk about the impact of music on society and all this kind of stuff. And it's so interwoven into our history as a people, as a human race. It's just integral to our existence. And they say, I remember one thing. I had like a world music course, and they were talking about the saying that music is the universal language. And somebody brought up, like, one of the articles we read was somebody was bringing up the point that actually it's not always um, universal, because a song that you may listen to that has it's sung in a language that you don't understand, you might enjoy how it feels and how it sounds, but you don't. The lyrics can mean a very different thing, right? Like I mean that's happened with so many times. Like I like for myself, I like to appreciate um, different forms of music from different countries. Like of course, we have Latin American countries. I mean it's just blowing up in the last few
yeah,
years.
for sure.
Um, I mean West African music like Afrobeat. Sorry,
Mhm.
Afro beats. Afro beats.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think it.
I remember having a class on sub-Saharan African music. Like, just they were talking about the difference between Afrobeat and Afrobeats, and I was like, okay, Afrobeats is the different stuff. That's what we listen to right now. But yeah, like just like I don't know what they're saying. I don't speak Yoruba. Like,
Yeah.
but I like the beat. I like the vibe, the composition. But
Mm,
I think it's an interesting point to bring up because it's so powerful, especially as yourself, you're a lyricist.
mm,
Words can mean so much. Um,
mm,
um, and yeah, like, what is your feeling on that? I guess as someone who uses words and you know
mm.
their music to convey whatever meaning, like for you, how do you use it as a tool to convey a message? I guess.
Yeah, like yeah. First of all, like your points, like just previously about like the culture of music, just hearing you kind of talk so intricately about like music and culture is just such a moving thing, and really is such a good spotlight on how music is interwoven in history. So I just wanted to just mention that,
Thank
like,
you, thank you.
yeah. But lyrics and how I use like words as a way to convey a message or what I needed to do. It's interesting. Words can be so much, right? Words can carry meaning, but they can also carry rhythm, right? So it's like meaning can be in rhythm, I guess, as well. But there's so much intricacies to how we use language, right? And I'm always learning this not only from trying and attempting to build good songs, but also from other artists who tell me, like, I know a really great artist. His name is Shay. He goes by Chuck Fence, sorry. And yeah, he makes this beautiful like alternative folk music, and he was just like to me, "Oh, be careful with how you kind of you be careful with like your arrangement of like words. Like I'm forgetting like the formal linguistic term for it, but like just word order and just your arrangement of how things sound, like even as little as like active and passive, or like what's implied versus what you directly say, right? If I say I fell or I crashed, both have very different sort of meanings when you write, when you put it in a line, and what that could imply for the person listening to it. So words can be powerful, which is, I think that's the thing I'm leading to here. For me personally, it's very diaristic a lot of the time. Like I write from how I'm feeling, so a lot of the times it'll be like I'll be inspired by things I might hear people say, or common themes that seem to come up, or you know, just like observations that I'm making. And from then on, it's like sometimes it's like I listen to the music, and the music might inform, like I guess how it's making me feel might inform the lyrics that'll come out. And then I'll roll, just like write down the lyrics and revise some of the things, like go back and change it and look more intricately at like what each of the things says. But I don't know, sometimes it's like using words instinctively versus using words technically. I think is another way
Okay.
in which to convey messages, right? Sometimes you listen to music and you just have an instinctive sort of like, I want to say this. And then at other moments, you are crafting something very particular, and so there's a lot of technicalities that are required, and you need it to land in a specific way, and that isn't to say you can't do that from a more natural sort of way of writing, but I think you can almost fine tune it and articulate it well when you're actually thinking of all the technicalities of language and what that implies. So like grammar rules, I'm terrible at grammar, but that still plays a big role in music.
Funny.
And yeah, I think of words and I think of poetry a lot too. I don't consider myself a good poet at all. But my mom thought I was a very good poet when I was young. So I'll at least wave that and say someone believes in me. But I think
Yeah.
that's also it's also very much informed by writing style now, where it's like, like rhyming and syllabic like meters, like how many syllables do I have? How do these flow? And what like does that how does that inform the rhythm, right? I talked about how words can inform rhythm, and then words and meaning, and how meaning and rhythm probably also interlinks as well. That's all sort of a back and forth. But yeah, sometimes it's like writing very intentionally to be quite obscure. I'm writing very much a lot of figures of speech, a lot of um, personification. And again, this is where like I take my education brain, like my English, what I learned when I was in English in high school, taking that figures of speech, applying to actual writing to create something, to create a story, to create a message, to create a poem that
Hmm.
flows and becomes a song. So I think words, I guess going back to the original things that I said, words can have meaning just in terms of what you say, but also meaning in terms of how it informs the sound and the rhythm. And I don't know, words can be so like you have infinite possibilities in what you're creating. It just depends on your imagination. Like it just depends on what you want to do. Like you can do the most unorthodox things with words to convey, you know, anything. If you want to convey like a percussive sort of like beat, and you're specifically saying a word like, I think of I'm a piano, which is Southern African, and I think of how a lot of Southern African music, like Kwaito, which is established in the townships, um, South African languages, some, not all, seem to have a lot of like uh, interesting or different enunciations of words. So I guess like when you think of us like a click sounds, but not all. I'm not trying to stereotype it. The entirety of the
Yeah.
African languages, they are very different, and it's worth looking into it. But how different words are pronounced, you can utilize the click sound not only for meaning but also for rhythm, right? If you have a click that's constantly like you have a time signature and you're keeping it, you're using that word not only to convey the meaning, but you're also using it to drive the rhythm of the song. And so there's, as I said before, just so much utility that language like offers us and lyrics offer us, not only from what you see when you read something, but also everything underneath it, everything that's implied, its placement in a song. Um, yeah, it's just so much, but that's my
Yeah.
ramble.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean obviously you're more versed than I am in terms of especially music setting, but I one of my instructors, my martial art instructor, crew Nick Bautista, he he was in uni for philosophy, and he later dropped out to start to fight, but what he um, what he often talks about, he still uses his ability as a writer. He's a phenomenal writer. Just the way he structures things and his vocabulary, and I think he's always been like that throughout his life, but he's just applied it to different things. And one thing he talked about the value of books is that text is like it's a visual representation of how we think. Um, and I had to think about it for a second. I was like, it's kind of true. The way we write is because it's in our own voice when we read something else, right? And it's literally the personification of, or not the personification, the visual representation of what we're thinking, and we just have to put it on something that we can actually see in front of us. Because in our mind, nothing is in a straight line, like how when you write on a page, right? Different lines. In our mind, it's a web of different ideas that come in and come out. Oh, I'm hungry right now. Oh, wait, maybe I should do this problem. I don't know. And then things are always going all over the place.
Mm,
And using writing as an outlet to actually just streamline things, right, is a common tool used by most people, right? Journaling and all these kind of things that have real value in
mm,
just making a change in people's mental state and just helping them focus just in general. Like, I mean, when most people write stuff down, they tend to get it done more. It's been tested over and over. When you implement to actually implement something, they did a study. I heard about it recently in one of my networking classes. They had people. Um, they compared three different methods to help people start working out. For example, one was don't influence them to do anything, right? Um, Two was to show them a very motivational video about exercising, and the third was to have them write down when they're going to exercise, um, in the form of a to do list. And not surprisingly, the people who wrote it down were stuck to their workout goals 60% of the time, or 60 to 70%. The people who actually didn't have anything said to them stuck to it about 40%, and the people who actually were shown the motivational video did about 10% of the time, interestingly. And I mean, that's just one example of it, but I think it's just another reason why writing and words are so important within, you know, how we interact, and how we go about our go about our life, just in general.
mm.
And yeah, what was I gonna mention? Oh yeah, I was gonna actually ask you about you talked about South African music and
Mm,
just your own culture sort of music in
mm,
general. Um, I think for me it's a bit of a different experience, obviously, because I grew up in Canada, which is not India, and and the music from where I'm from, Punjab, is just it's a my connection to it has changed a lot. Like as a kid, you don't really appreciate it as much. Once you get
mm,
older, you feel the impact of these sort of songs, and especially as a musician, um, you can really appreciate like certain things. Like um, Punjabi music, I find just because I know more about it than other things, I find it's so interesting how diverse it is within just that region of the world. It's not even, Punjab used to be of this the whole Indian subcontinent of one of the biggest state, right? It was all of Pakistan, and then, or not all of Pakistan, all of Punjab, Pakistan, and Haryana and India, now East Punjab, and all these different parts. And across our region span many different cultures and religions, and that influenced the music. There's what's popular now, Bangla music is it's like people like Diljit Dosanjh and Siddha Musiala, who just passed unfortunately recently, and all these sort of things, like different waves of it. I become to appreciate it more after delving into it, and this that world music course, right? Because it made me look up and just go back, because I already knew about because I grew up in a Punjabi family, but to really understand where it comes from and what it means and just the language. I've always been interested in different languages, and obviously my
mm,
own mother tongue is something that's important to me. I can't speak it very well. I can understand solid. I can read and write a bit, but to really understand the meaning and see how beautiful the language is, because in India, a lot of these languages that are attached to a specific region are being lost because of Hindi being, it's they want to standardize it across. And I mean, there's a whole political thing that's going on right now, but I don't want to get into that right now. I've already talked about it before, but basically, a lot of places around India, even in the south and in the north and the west and the east, they're losing their native tongue that's been around for so long, right? Like Punjabi has been around for over 2,000 years, and Hindi is relatively new language. And it was just brought around, I mean, it was brought to standardize a language around India. And interestingly enough, I mean, language is so diverse within that region because it's so ancient. And there's over, I mean, I think statistically it's got the most languages within a country in the entire world. It's got hundreds of different languages, and within those, there's different dialects of those languages, right? And seeing how the language really influences the art is very interesting as well. Like Punjabi music, just I used to think that it wasn't like anything interesting, but it's such a beautiful language, and that's something I've really wanted to try and push myself, is to go back and really delve into it and actually learn these phrases and just how to actually communicate in a lyrical way, not just because I can communicate in a casual way with a family and grandma and grandpa, and but to use it as a tool as I can use English, right, in the same method. That's one of my goals, right? Like I can speak French, but I can't speak it in the way that somebody who grew up speaking it their entire life, right? Like I learned in school from the age of technically from age of 8 till 17, but I mean I speak it conversationally. It's a different. I don't have the same connection to it as I do English, and Punjabi is different. And I found that I think it's just great that you appreciate your own culture's music. Because a lot of people don't realize the value when they grow up somewhere where that's not where they're culturally from. And yeah,
mm.
I just thought that was nice.
Thank you. Honestly, hearing about like the history of Punjabi music and what that has entailed. No, not only has it been incredibly informative for me, and I'm not curious that I want to go back and research it a little bit more just to see what that looks like. But I feel like with diasporic identities, um, sort of the calling back to like knowing and hearing, what your cultural music is, what your cultural language is, how those two kind of interplay is something that I find that with a lot of my friends who have immigrated away from home, that usually tends to be the case where it's like, as we get older, initially when we're younger, it's like, oh my goodness, I hate, like mom and dad, why are you making me listen to this? Like, I think
Yeah.
it's, it's so embarrassing. But then it's like, as you get older, you realize the importance of clinging on to your heritage and what that means for you. It's, I think, a difficult thing, and as I would imagine in your case when you've grown up, I wouldn't say severed from that, but you are further away. It's not like in India where you have that culture kind of everywhere, kind of surrounding you, and you're engrossed in it. But definitely, again, being far away, diasporic identities, there's a curiosity that you naturally have as you get older, where it's like, what what does how does my language flow? What does this culture mean? What is the music behind it? How does language and culture, how are they all infused in music at some point in time? And so that like cultural resurgence seems to be like a trend in a lot of people from the diaspora, just wanting that resurgence in your own identity, wanting that appreciation. And I feel like we're never too old to kind of go back and really like take up learning again our languages because it's really
Yeah.
important how that influences like our musical appreciation in many ways. That's one thing that I found as I got older was like, especially as I've been working on songs now, is like I'm heavily influenced by obviously the music I grew up listening to, which was a lot of Southern African music, but also it inspired me to kind of go back and really do a lot of deep diving into understanding, you know, the nuances of music history. And so, like, I discovered, like, I was trying to put together a project which I'm still unsure of how it's going to pan out, but it'll be something in my lifetime that I'll release. But looking at things like psychedelic music as it relates to like mid African, Southern African music, specifically Zam rock, which is Zambian rock music. I had no idea it was a thing, but then I listened to it and um, just the way the percussives were used. There's a lot of percussive instrumentation and kicks and drums that are specific to Southern Africa, djembes and other sort of not necessarily Congo, but like drums that are built with that sort of sound and interesting sort of I guess guitars that would have only been available to us at that time since we weren't necessarily the States. So having those makeshift sort of instruments and then more traditional music, right? Understanding the nuances of like where traditional music comes from, why it's associated with specific ceremonies and cultural appreciation. So there's so much to kind of I guess as you get older delve into your culture and learn to appreciate because in some way, shape, or form it manifests. It might not be in your music, it might be in your style, it might be in the way you think and move through life. And so yeah, there's just so much power to the resurgence of one's culture, and so much power to acknowledging the duality that kind of happens when you immigrate, and now you're taking on a Canadian identity, and as much as a Canadian identity is also, it's I think one of the more flexible ones if you look at like many of the different countries in the world. You're still in many ways able to retain you know whatever your cultural heritage is, albeit it may be different from like if you were to
Hmm.
go wherever your people are across the world. So yeah, I don't know. I really love the point that you kind of expressed going into your music history, and it inspires me a lot heavily to kind of champion my own and even in the modern age, sort of like you mentioned with I'm forgetting now, but sort of fusions of music, taking that cultural music and integrating it now into, into modern styles. You know,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like it's and I'm kind of glad I've started to do that now at the age I am instead of later. and it just feels. I mean, the thing is about the Canadian identity, it's always been a topic that it's existed in Canadian society since the beginning of it. And it's a very precarious kind of idea because there's a lot of history of people who have been here for 100,000 years, and colonizers and all these kind of complicated topics that we always hear about when you go up here. And there's a lot of dark stuff. It's not just the states that has dark past. Every country's got a dark past. Ours is just more recent, and we're just the formation of Canada as a country is just recent. It's a recent thing, just like states compared to countries in Europe, countries like India, China. These places are they have so much history that has been preserved and culture that has been developed. I know it was funny. I was listening to this comedian. He was talking about it. He's like, you know what? He's like, the stereotype about the Greeks, they never work, but he's like, you know what? They have time to develop their culture. They realize what's actually important. And he's like, drink wine, eat good food. He's like, they innovated for a long time. They can take a break. And I thought about that for the Canadian identity, why it's so difficult to define. It's just that the country of Canada has been around for less than 200 years. Societies within Europe and Asia and Africa have been around for thousands and thousands of years. How can we expect to form an identity? We think about, these two countries, oh, sorry, Canada specifically, I'm talking about being so diverse in its cultural makeup. But if you look at the history, for example, India, how many thousands of different gene pools have passed through India? The physical makeup of Indians has changed so much just in terms of gene pool, um, language, and all these sorts of things. Like culture has changed so much within that region, but it takes a long time. Like it takes so long for culture to change. And now it's like, and it's still hard to pinpoint what is an Indian. Like I would honestly, a lot of times I don't really think of myself as Indian. Indian is second. First thing is Punjabi, right? Because that's my region where I'm from. It's an ethnicity. Nationality is something that's created by a state, and even race itself I believe, is just a tool for um, some sort of regime. Because, I mean, technically in the 70s I'd be considered white, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because the white is also called Caucasian, and people who are considered white are not all from the Caucasus Mountains in Georgia, or in Central Eurasia. And it's like all these terms, like, it's just if only we could go by the ethnicity, I think that would be the best eventually. But there's so many, right? But it's hard to do a census with every single ethnicity in Canada, but it'd just be nice because that's what I really connect to. I don't connect to being brown. Because really, nobody's white, nobody's black. We're all just some different shade of brown, right? And and the skin color is, I mean, it's just a development of where your your genes are from. Like, people develop in a certain way because that's what their ancestors a million years ago had to deal with, right? We all adapt. And to think that makes us any different as people is just, crazy. The thing is, even in India, of course, it still exists with the whole north south thing has always existed. The term, it's usually the term of Aryan versus Dravidian. And Aryan, people know from Hitler's Aryan race. Ironically, he stole that from, it's a Sanskrit word from India, and he also stole the Hindu symbol, um, turned it to the side and made it mean something else. But the term of Aryan never meant. It was kind of based off of this. I went into this crazy like deep dive into language history, and I don't know why. I was during that music course too, but just talking about there's a language pool called the Indo-Aryan language, and that's where many of the languages in North India come from. And over 46% of people speak a language that comes from one root language, which originates from, we think, from this tribe in Eurasia, which is called Indo-European. Um, Basically, most of the languages in Europe, uh, Iran, Indian subcontinent, all originate from this one language in, they think, northern Turkey or central Georgia, around that area, the Caucasus Mountains, somewhere around there. And I think they think it spread about maybe 5,000, 5 to 6,000 years ago. And you see the language change a lot um, throughout these regions. And there's a reason why there's a lot of similar words between, for example, Punjabi and Persian. There's a lot of words that are Persian rooted, and you think, why do I kind of recognize what that means? Like it all comes from the same language. Even mythology and the paganism in different religions, in traditional religions, we think comes from one of the original religions by this group of people. Um, and like for example Greek gods and Gaelic gods, Nordic gods, even Hindu gods, all these sort of things they think comes from an influence from this culture. And it was just so interesting because that music course just gave me the initial push to go into that kind of stuff because I've always loved language. And it's so interesting how really connected we are because if you think about English and Hindi are part of the same language group, and it's kind of hard to even imagine that, right? Um, and it's just, I think it's kind of a grounding thing where we think we're so different, but we're really all the same, like we're all really connected, and the things that we think make us different, um, or things that we use to other people, and treat them as a different group. Um, it's just, you realize how ridiculous it is. We can still have our own identity, right? Because we're all humans. We have our individuality. We have our community, but we all have the same sort of root, and people claim all these different things like, oh, we're from here, so we're better, and you're from there, so you're lower than us. And I don't know. I find it's a little, it simplifies things when you see something like that, because humans all came from this region and Ethiopia from one common ancestor, right? Like we're all one, but we're also all something else at the same time, right? It's the duality of being everything and nothing at the same time. But yeah, I don't know. I just went into some random rant.
No, it's so interesting to see how this music course really inspired such a branch of thought for you, where it's like you're looking at biogeographical studies and how that relates to language development as well, not only assessing like population development and the like genetic makeup of those people, but as well the development of language as it relates to that too, and how language then spreads and moves, and how more right there are social theories which talk about how language informs how people move through the world. So there's a lot of intricacies that are there to it, and I think I like the sentiments that you express, where it's like we are all made of one of the same stuff. We come from, there was one source that almost just like spawned just the creation of all of us, and then immigration happened, and people moved across, and their genetics were exposed to different mutagens, and these different environmental pressures and epigenetic things, and all sorts of complex things, and nature versus nurture, and so many different things begin to factor into the establishment of different civilizations. I'm sure a lot of anthropologists, biologists, really all the ologists, and have their working theories of how we got to where we got to. But we certainly live in quite a divisive world, where it's like, now we made those differences. We kind of took like a nail and hammered them onto each other's backs, and in many ways made those differences the the weapon to kind of drive a lot of segregation, genocide, colonialism,
Mm-hmm.
um, just difference in a way in which we kind of pit ourselves against one another, and that warps the psychology of so many minds, right? Where it's like generations and generations now socialized within their units of birth to kind of think in a way. And so we truly have strayed very far from the origin point. And I don't know, very much hope one day in the future things could be simplified, but I also doubt that that will ever be the case, just with how, you know, we grow different every each and every day. As much as
Yeah,
we also like to think that we come closer to being together, things change.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's ironic that we all come from the same thing, but it's also the one thing in us that divides us is that tribalism, which is so rooted in our survival. Like, tribalism is so rampant in every aspect of human society since the dawn of, us walking on 2 feet. Like it's so it's so ingrained in our. It's just the world. Life is so ironic, and it's
Mhm.
just yeah. But I mean, you being South African, you know better than most about this sort of division in I mean, apartheid, of course, is one of the
Mhm.
famous example of this in action tribalism, and it's just, I mean, I was wondering about your experience. Obviously, you weren't alive during apartheid, but obviously these sort of things have generational impacts. So, I mean, as as someone who grew up in South Africa, I mean, how did that affect your daily life? I mean, it must have had some sort of impact, even though it was so long ago.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that this is like a very intricate topic of like identity. For me, I was born in Zambia, and very early on, my parents moved like to South Africa because in the same way that people move and immigrate to different countries for opportunities, my parents saw greater prospects of employment that were coming about. But that was also the apartheid regime really only ended quite early on in the 1990s. So, and that's still very recent if you think about
Yeah,
relative
it's not
history of
long
it.
at all.
Yeah, so an independent South Africa is a very new concept, even till this day. And so it was very interesting. Like I always, um, the way in which there's so much polarity between races in the States and how South Africa operates is different. But like there is a great sense of that tension, yeah, that exists in its own unique way within South Africa, where it's like, you navigate there and you are very much aware of, your identity and what that carries for you if you are black, if you're white. Um, I must say number one is it's a beautiful country to live in, and the people are amazing and have such rich culture. The Zulus, again, there's so many different languages quite similar to India, where it's like we have a ton of different languages and dialects that kind of exist in South Africa, and so each of them unique to different set of groups, from the Shangani to the Xhosa to the Zulus to the Sepedi, to the Sutu and the Tswana. There's so many different subgroups that exist and languages that exist, and each of them having their own unique culture. And so I think that was always something that was beautiful to me, was to see the pride that Black people took in their culture. It was, the adornments and the decorations and the jewelry and the clothing. Whenever sort of, traditional events came through, it was the dances they do, like the Zulus, I think. I don't know if some of the other groups as well do it, but they do gumboot dancing, and I got to learn that when I was much younger. And so it's this rhythmic movement of like lifting your feet into the air and slamming it
Oh
down and
yeah, I think
actually,
I've seen a video on that. Yeah.
yeah, it was such a treat to learn and to be able to be a part of that culture in many ways and to appreciate it. And um, I just think in so many ways there's just such pride in being black and in what that stands for within a South African context, which isn't always shown. I think a lot of the times we be like apartheid was there and it's just crazy. And I mean there's a lot of difficulty and strife that exists, but there's also a lot of solidarity within the communities that exists as well. A resurgence and almost a decolonialism that is within the midst and still being propagated by the youth today. In terms of generational sort of like you know ideologies, the youth kind of carry with them a lot that their parents have had been through. If their parents lived through apartheid, then I think it's a discussion that will happen, that's bound to happen, like the intricacies of understanding race and who they are manifest at the dinner tables because people feel it every day, whether it's in micro or macro aggressions, whether it's just in, knowing how you, if you're black and navigating certain things and thinking to yourself, why am I disadvantaged? Or why do we have, in the case, affirmative action in terms of black economic empowerment, where, certain companies, certain institutions are selecting black folk to kind of take up space in these places. And you can trace the history back there. But for sure, in learning it, not only in the educational system, but with your discussions with parents, sometimes like the youth, rightfully so, depending on if you're black or white or, it isn't just black or white. There are so many different cultures that exist as well. Because there are many people that immigrate. There are Indian people that I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
maybe somebody from India might be like, they're not true Indians, I've heard some people say, but I mean, they are.
Well,
You know,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. They came for other reasons than just immigration too. Yeah. But,
For sure. Indentured, yeah. But for sure, it's navigating those spaces is it's difficult. You develop a sense of self-awareness of who you are and how you navigate within this world because it impacts everything. Your identity impacts your access to so many things, impacts your treatment, impacts your possibility. And so, what I was kind of getting to is that sometimes black youth are sometimes really upset about the environment that they have to live in because they have to, carry on the strife that their parents have had to endure in many ways and still fight for, better treatment, equal treatment, more opportunities. Um, there's so much to South Africa that still needs work, and the youth are advocating for that, and obviously some economic leaders as well. But more and more that like power and sometimes even radicalism expressed in it also gives birth to such ingenuity and just change. You see black leaders, young leaders, who really want to make a change and make a difference by giving back to the community. And that's something that's there as well. Is there's strife, but there's also, like I said before, there's community that exists. And now in terms of interactions with like other sort of ethnic groups. Things work, things don't work. There's tension, there isn't tension. It's just how life is, and so
yeah.
you just sort of become socialized to that. That you realize there's difference, you realize the difference in treatment, and you hope that you can meet someone. If they're not from the same ethnic group as you hope that you can meet someone who's still kind and open and willing to learn and unlearn. I think I also recognized that, like as I grew older in South Africa, there were more people who were willing to learn and unlearn and not just carry, you know, grief and hatred with them. They were able to acknowledge that as being a part of history and even present day in many ways, but still move towards, in some ways, peace or peace within themselves. Because I think it's difficult to kind of talk of peace in a collective way. But
Hmm.
living in South Africa was, eye-opening in ways that I probably would never know. So it was a time, a lovely experience, a difficult experience, and um, yeah, always just I remember it fondly though, because for all that it was, there was so much beauty that was there that I can look back on now as an adult and just be like, this is amazing, despite the difficulties that could be present.
Yeah, I totally can understand that sort of society. I mean, in India, we've had many similar situations with that, of course. And it's not always rooted in colonialism, especially in India. Um, and it's it's always a touchy thing. I mean, like for me, like I said before, I wouldn't really call myself Indian because India didn't exist till the British decided to leave. You know, I mean, people in the north can understand people in the south. I can understand somebody. I can understand somebody who's in Pakistan, which is a different country now, better than I can understand somebody who's, you know, just east of Punjab, right? Because we speak the same language, we have the same culture, but there's just this line in between us. And the region of Punjab has been in such turmoil for so many years because the access to the Indus, well, the Indian subcontinent has been through the Khyber Pass, and Khyber Pass is directly um, is within Punjab on the edges of the mountains, and that region has been ravaged by. It's always been forced to defend itself, right, by different invaders, be it Alexander the Great, who reached that point, um, Genghis Khan, the Mughals, the the Caliphate. Like so many different the Persians. I mean, so many different people have gone to that region, and India has undergone many different kingdoms and civilizations, and the whole region has just been influenced by so many different things. Like we even have a name for Alexander the Great in Punjabi. Sikandar is his name, um, which is pretty cool. You know, to think that this person, like this ancient person from across, not too far from us, really, it seems like, but across the Middle East and in Europe, you know, um, is we have this name that we still use. It's still used in general society. Like we don't just say Alexander, and the whole region of Punjab is just it was a region that was very diverse in that sense of in terms of religion, um, and like for example, the Sikhs. I'm Sikh. The Sikhs, Sikhism was born there in Punjab, but Hindus and Muslims and Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs are the general population there. It's a big Catholic population now. It's starting to grow, and it's always been some place where there's been very little division in that sense because it's not very religiously homogenous, or used to be at least, um, and it's just that teaching of acceptance of others, and I'm just glad to have been born this way. Like I've really appreciated. I really like being Punjabi. I like being. It's not that I've been influenced the other way, where it's been like you shouldn't be. Um, it's just realizing it. Like no, this is pretty good. Being part of this people with this history, this food, this culture, and to see it being stripped away in India right now is just. I mean, it's been going on for a while. Like that region has been such turmoil ever since partition. I mean, partition was. I mean, it just over millions of people died in partition, and even my great grandfather was actually kidnapped during that time, and he never made it over the border to the other side because we were actually from the Pakistan side of Punjab. We're from Western Punjab, and then we had to immigrate because if you were Muslim, you had to get out basically, and if you were Muslim in India, you had to go the other way. That was kind of the idea, and displacement of peoples being forcibly removed by a new country being formed is just obviously has problems with that, and yeah, that's not even talking about the unspeakable things the British have done to that region, and of course you would South Africa has been just the African continent in general has been unfortunately a subject of colonization, as of many parts of the world, and it has many lasting impacts. Then, I mean, the thing is, I have no for me in my relationship with the British. It's like I'm not, I don't hate British people, you know, but it's I mean, in India, there's definitely disdain for the English. I mean, every dog was named Jack or Ben. Um, I, I mean, yeah. But the thing is, for me, I grew up with a different perspective, right? I know the horrible things that I've done, but does the daily British person who acknowledges the past, does that person deserve to feel that hatred? No. But I couldn't give, I couldn't care less about the royal family. Like the Queen passed and whatever she has. She wasn't the one enslaving me, but I mean, whatever. I'm not gonna wish ill. I'm not gonna have ill will against her, but I kind of am indifferent in that sense. But I mean, these sorts of things have huge impacts on society. I mean, just looking at First Nations populations here in Canada. I mean, residential schools, all these sorts of things. These have so many lasting impacts, and it's just yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and like in India right now, there's a whole Hindu nationalist thing that's been going on for a while, and it's Punjab has always been the state that fights back against these sort of things, and even ever since the British have been there, there's been revolution after revolution, millions murdered by this, and obviously the events of '84 are the most recent thing we can think of in India. I'm not going to go over it right now because I don't want to get into the details, but um, it's essentially a genocide of the Sikh people in India in the mid '80s, um, and from that point on, I mean, it's just been a battle between the government and Punjab's land rights and water rights. I mean, Punjab is the name means is broken to Punj Ab. Punj means five. Ab means river. It's a five land of five rivers, and I mean they supply most of the water for the rest of India. Yet the government is very centralized, so they've always had very little rights to their own water, and they've been forced to adapt, and a lot of places are becoming barren, and it's like the region is being destroyed because of these sorts of relinquishing of these rights that should be afforded to someone of any state, right? Punjab is one of the only states that's so heavily controlled by the central government because it's so powerful, right? And yeah, it's just I mean, that's one reason I'd say I'm glad to be here in Canada because, people talk about all these sorts of things in society. There's a lot of things we have to deal with, and they're real issues, right? But I mean, nobody's getting burned alive in the street. Like, not, and during the day, nobody, I mean, I'm not saying nobody, but this kind of stuff is still so rooted in society there. Like, in India, a lot of times there's a reason why people come to Canada because I mean caste system is still in there. It's still it won't ever go away. I mean you're stuck in one position for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter because you are lower. Like that's just how it is. And obviously Sikhs we do not believe in the caste system, but it still runs society. It's a Hindu dominated society. 70% of the religious people are Hindu, and it's so rampant in there, and honestly every time I see these kind of things going on the world, I'm just glad to be Canadian. I mean, I don't have to see this kind of stuff daily, things happening in Palestine and Syria and all these different regions around the world where we don't see, in Ukraine and all these sorts of things. Like you don't see it in your face, but once it happens to you, like something that you see of your own people, that's when you really connect to it, right? Because you can imagine your sister, your mother, your brother in a similar situation. You just like I just feel so grateful to be here. And yeah, this kind of took a dark turn this episode. Started about music and now I'm like going into all this stuff, but
The intricacies of, I mean, like, I think it warrants it when we discuss, like, civilizations and different cultures. And I think colonialism, right? Like, how it's happened across so many different countries and really run rampant in so many different places and taken so much from so many different people. Um, but what was I going to say to that? One thing that I really appreciated, like hearing from you, was also the pride that you have being, Punjabi, and I think that that's something that's powerful as well, right? We recognize history and the present day effects of colonialism as they stand. The one thing that I kind of saw in my I took a really great Intro to Indigenous Studies course back at UTM with Professor Robin Gray. Amazing. She's a Tim Sian, great professor. Really wonderful. If you ever had the opportunity to take that course, if anyone's listening and they're like, I want to like an intro to what that is. But when we're looking at Indigenous reconciliation, a lot of Indigenous decolonialism, sorry, a lot that kind of was mentioned was on the topic of, also, I'm sorry if you can hear a cat being on me. I don't know if it's
I don't know. It's all right. I can hear.
um, uh, one really, really important thing is cultural researches, and that starts with, there being means and a way in which systems are allowing people to express pride and, allow the revival of the culture, especially at the hands of different forms of genocide that have occurred, right? Obviously, it's unfortunate to hear, like, within the region of India that you had mentioned, where it's like culture is being lost, but in many ways, it's like in you and your own pride, you are a symbol of the revival of that culture. And like in the ways in which you express and talk about these things and have these discussions, as difficult and grim as they may be, that is in and of itself a stand or like a protest against sort of the dilution, sort of the uh, process of like your culture being warped, sort of the destruction in and of itself. Culture lives within us, right? And so it's through these conversations and these discussions, you educating me on things I didn't even know of, that it's like I'm able to also take appreciation and in some way, hopefully, once destruction happens, unfortunately, there is also the opportunity to rebuild. And with the knowledge that we still have and still can retain, it's unfortunate that there's any process of destruction to begin with, because that's not ideal. It's not a mean, it doesn't justify the means, right? But I'm someone who just like strongly believes in having conversations like this, and you yourself educating yourself about this and carrying it with you in your heart is something that you can educate other people on. And when many know it, when people know knowledge, I think that's not something you can necessarily extinguish from the mind, right? It lives eternally kind of there to be passed on. In many ways, how a lot of like our previous ancestors, I would imagine, far, 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 far back, like would share information and again, even like linking to now in indigeneity, sharing through time, sharing through conversation and storytelling. There's so much power in that. So I don't know. I appreciate you kind of taking me on the journey of like understanding the nuances of Indian history, and also just like acknowledging the world for what it is, like colonialism and its impact, not only in the past but also currently, and also how you frame yourself in terms of your relationship to that whole concept, how it's like that indifference is your way of coping and moving forward from it, because you don't want to carry that like hatred and spew it onto other people, albeit there are those who do carry it, and it's like it's that's a journey for them to live, right?
Yeah.
To kind of see the repercussions of those actions and what it and how maybe it bodes well, maybe it doesn't, but certainly life is incredibly nuanced, and discussions like these are important as much as it's about music. Music relates to this because you can even trace back how our music was influenced by colonialism
Hmm.
or pre-existing music that happened before that, and how again there's now a resurgence of it. There are fusions, there are differences, um, so yeah, it's a full circle conversation, I think, to mention.
Yes, yes. This has always been the kind of format for the Way podcast. It generally comes up with somebody who is very interested in a topic and is an expert or really enjoys doing it, and then it just becomes full circle. We talk about something that's in our hearts and that
Mm.
and then we just end up back where we started, you know?
Full of life.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I just want to say one last thing because we've been going for a while now, but one last thing before we go, I want to mention, the whole thing about carrying that hatred. Thankfully, I don't have it as much because I don't have to see it. I don't have to see it in front of me, right? My grandparents had to see it. My parents, they grew up here, but they saw the events of '84. They were alive during that. My uncles came as refugees during that time. Like it's such a real thing that was happening. There's so many stories during that time I could tell you, like just crazy stuff. But
Mm,
there's also the other side of like sometimes for people who harbor that hatred to white people and all this kind of thing. Um, I think it's important to remember that you're just we can't revert back to you can't beat hate with hate, right? Like it never works. It's a vicious cycle of hate versus hate, and then one hate wins and the other hate begins again, and then the other hate wins, and it's um, it's not productive into actually growing as people. And I think you got to give people the space to learn, make mistakes, because there are people who are uneducated, and if they're willing to be educated, you got to let them make mistakes. Like say something culturally insensitive, but they don't. Sometimes people say these kind of things, right? Like if you don't know about it, how you're expected to learn if you can make a mistake. Um, and the important thing is about acknowledging the mistake and learning how to move forward with it, right? And that's the best thing I think for us to grow as people and have a better relationship within a community, especially as diverse as a Canadian society, And the thing is, like, where I grew up, I was mostly South Asian population when I was in elementary school, and then in middle school it was more mixed. It was South Asian, um, a lot of Caribbeans, and when I went to high school, it was completely different. I saw majority white people for the first time in my life at my school, and there are a lot of Middle Eastern people, Arabs and Persians, and more Chinese people, and just all these different types of people, different experiences. And I'm glad I kind of had that because, I mean, if everyone is the same within a community, it always breeds something um, like the sort of comfortability that is dangerous, right? Um, because when I grew up in a community of mostly Punjabi people when I was young, it's like they harbor the same sort of ideas that any other tribalized group would, right? X person is bad, don't trust these kind of people, But when you're exposed to different, really exposed, like you interact with them, and not just that you live with them, because we all live with each other. We're not just killing each other every time we see a different person, but to actually interact and be part of society with these people that are different from you is when you really understand, right? Because if you don't, like, it's important to have different perspective, and you can't always get that just from within your own community. You have to branch out because I find that I love being around people of my own culture and speak my own language, but it's also the beauty of human race is that we have so many different versions of a human, so many different versions of our culture, and yeah, just be nice to people and learn about other cultures in a careful way, learn about people's history because everyone's got something to share. It's not just white people got culture too. People say white people got no culture. I mean, look at white people, right? Europe, that region, there's so much culture there. Just people have to recognize it, right? We're all beautiful people, and we just got to realize that sometimes.
this reminds me of that. The tie back to music. This reminds me of the J. Cole song "Snow on the Bluff," right? When during the height of the BLM protest, there was a bit of that. I don't know if this was just an allegation, if it was actually set in stone, but a beef between how No Name had expressed the importance for Black men to rally behind and really support Black women, and J. Cole released that, like really just this beautiful parable which kind of talks about his perspective of things, where it's like, you know, almost teaching it reminds me of something quite important of like the patience we have with children is the same way we need to treat like other adults, is having that level of like, children are going to make mistakes, and we give them the opportunity to correct themselves, we give them the opportunity to learn and grow in those conducive settings. And I think the song, he kind of referenced something similar to that, like almost like kind of like treat me as a child, like treat me as though I'm a child learning these things for the first time. Give me the room to kind of make that mistake. And I think that goes back to what you mentioned. And albeit I think when we're thinking of, homogenous groups, it's also taking this from a trauma-informed perspective, understanding the nuances of trauma that might have led those people to kind of want to always kind of congregate together, right? There's so much nuances that go into why collectives form the way they do. But it is like in acknowledging what you mentioned, which is the important point of how if ever we are to kind of grow beyond ourselves, that also does happen with interacting with different cultures, seeing what that has to offer, and adding to a very holistic human perspective. I think a lot of the people that I see display a level of just increased enlightenment usually come from those that are willing to have, those conversations with people that don't share the same opinions with them, that are allow themselves to sit in that discomfort in many ways, allow themselves to be challenged, allow themselves to grow, and accept the beauty of having duality, having opposing ideas, because that's what we can do as humans. Like you don't always have to hold one thing in your mind. And yeah, I think I like the sentiment that you ended this off with, which is obviously uh, we are one people, and obviously the importance of understanding the nuances of human experience. But yeah, through learning about different cultures, I definitely feel like that's possible. So.
Yeah. Okay, I think we should probably end it. It's been I'm getting kind of hungry, not gonna lie. It's been like an hour 40, but
Oh my
yeah,
god.
yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Josh. And anything you want to plug at the end?
Oh, anything on the planet opinion? I don't know. I'm working on new music. If you made it this far in our very long conversation, I wanted to say thank you, Session, for having me.
Of
Listen
course,
to
no problem,
Corn
man.
on your song. The title's "Corn on the Cob," right?
Yeah, yeah,
Listen
yeah.
to that.
Oh
That's what
yeah,
I'm
plug
looking
my own. Yeah,
for.
yeah.
Listen to that. Be safe, be kind to people, and yeah, live your best lives safely.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a like, save it to your playlist on Spotify or on YouTube. Hit that bell notification for more future episodes. And yeah, comment if you guys like this episode. Let us know what you want to hear next. And yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Well, can't see my hand.